A timeless ingredient, salt has shaped human history for far longer than most people realize. As early as 6050 BCE, salt was already woven into daily life, belief systems, and global trade. From ancient Egyptian religious offerings to Phoenician trade routes stretching across the Mediterranean, salt quietly became one of humanity's most powerful resources. Even today, traces of salt's legacy surround us. The word celery comes from salt. So does salad, a reminder of early Romans seasoning their greens with it. For much of history, salt was so valuable that governments tightly controlled its production. In many places, it wasn't just a seasoning, it was money. Most of us think of salt as the white crystals sitting in a shaker on the dinner table, but salt is far more than that. It is essential to human life, vital for animals, and even necessary for many plants. For thousands of years, it was one of the most effective food preservatives ever known. Its industrial uses are countless, and its cultural presence stretches from poetry and folklore to film and religion. Because of its importance, salt became the subject of myths, fairy tales, and moral stories across civilizations. It fueled trade, sparked wars, and shaped traditions. In many cultures, offering bread and salt to a guest symbolized trust, protection, and hospitality. And in places like the Sahara or the mountains of Nepal, salt trading today still mirrors the rhythms of life from centuries ago. Salt predates written history, but by 2700 BCE, it was already being studied scientifically. In ancient China, one of the earliest known pharmacology texts described over 40 different types of salt, along with extraction methods remarkably similar to those still used today. Chinese rulers quickly realized that salt could fund an empire, and taxing it became a major source of state revenue. Salt carried immense economic power. The phrase "not worth his salt" traces back to ancient Greece, where salt was traded for slaves. Roman soldiers received special salt allowances known as salarium, the origin of the modern word salary. Across languages, salt left its mark: sauce, sausage, all echoing its importance in food and trade. Religion, too, embraced salt. It symbolized purity and permanence. The Bible references salt more than 30 times, including the phrase "salt of the earth." Altars were purified with it. Sacred rituals depended on it. Across faiths, salt became a bridge between the physical and the spiritual. Entire cities and empires rose on salt. Venice built its wealth through salt monopolies. Salzburg, literally salt fortress, thrived on mining it. Tuzla, named after the Turkish word for salt, stood at the heart of Balkan trade. Even today, salt flats in Bolivia house hotels built entirely from salt blocks. Salt has bankrupted kings and fueled revolutions. Spanish ambitions collapsed after Dutch blockades cut off Iberian salt supplies. In France, the infamous gabelle, or salt tax, grew so extreme that it became a direct spark for revolution. In India, Mahatma Gandhi challenged British rule by marching to the sea and making salt, turning a simple mineral into a symbol of freedom. In the Americas, salt made exploration possible. Preserved fish allowed European fleets to cross the Atlantic and settle North America. During the American Revolution and Civil War, access to salt became a military priority. Armies marched, supplies failed, and battles were fought all because of salt. From ancient empires to modern nations, salt has never been ordinary. It preserved food, powered economies, shaped borders, and ignited rebellion. Salt didn't just season history, it made it. The history of salt production in the United States. Long before modern industry, salt production in the United States began with indigenous knowledge. In 1654, reports from Onondaga, New York, revealed that the Onondaga people were already producing salt by boiling brine drawn from natural salt springs. This method, simple, labor-intensive, and effective, would shape American salt production for centuries. By the colonial era, Americans had adopted similar techniques. While the U.S. Constitution was being drafted, iron kettles filled with brine were already boiling across the colonies. Salt was not a luxury, it was a necessity for survival, food preservation, and trade. As the nation expanded, so did its demand for salt. Before 1755, Native Americans in the Kanawha Valley of West Virginia were producing salt from brine springs. By 1800, large-scale salt works were operating there, and within just a few years, drilling began to access more concentrated brine deep underground. During the American Civil War, salt became strategically vital. The Kanawha Valley supplied the Confederacy with much of its salt, and production peaked as thousands of workers produced more than 225,000 short tons by boiling brine. Control over salt meant control over food, and armies could not march without it. Similar stories unfolded further south. At Avery Island, Louisiana, historians believe Native Americans were producing salt more than 500 years before Europeans arrived. During the War of 1812, brine boiled salt from the region supplied American forces. By 1862, full-scale production began in open pits and quarries, and in 1869, Avery Island saw the launch of its first underground salt mine. Not all American salt came from boiling. In the early 1800s, solar salt production emerged even in less than ideal climates. Producers built movable, covered sheds over evaporation pans to shield brine from rain. Solar salt was first made along San Francisco Bay in 1770, and later at the Great Salt Lake in Utah in 1847. By the 1830s, Cape Cod alone had 440 salt works. Technology soon transformed the industry. Around 1833, mechanical evaporation systems known as grainer pans allowed salt makers to purify brine before evaporation, producing cleaner, whiter salt. Later innovations at Silver Springs, New York, introduced enclosed vacuum pans, allowing salt crystals to form more efficiently and consistently. Between 1790 and 1860, salt was produced across states including Louisiana, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Indiana, Illinois, and Missouri. In Michigan, waste wood from the lumber industry provided cheap fuel for salt furnaces at Saginaw and St. Clair. In 1882, drillers struck a massive rock salt deposit at St. Clair, unlocking saturated brine and accelerating industrial production. This discovery led to solution mining, where water was pumped underground to dissolve salt deposits, which were then extracted and evaporated. Once deposits were fully mapped, conventional underground mining followed. These methods remain in use today. Salt mining continues across Kansas, Louisiana, Ohio, New York, Texas, and throughout Canada in Ontario, Quebec, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick. Entire communities grew around salt, shaping local culture, economy, and identity. Few names symbolize American salt more than Morton, whose branding made salt instantly recognizable nationwide. Beneath cities like Detroit, Michigan, vast underground salt mines still operate, hidden reminders that even modern America rests on layers of ancient salt. From indigenous knowledge to industrial mining, salt didn't just support American history, it quietly built it. Salt and the Sacred, a history of salt and religion. For thousands of years, salt has been far more than a seasoning. Across civilizations, it became a symbol of purity, protection, permanence, and the divine. In ancient Greece, worshippers consecrated salt during religious rituals, believing it carried cleansing power. In Jewish tradition, salt held a sacred role in temple offerings. Even today, many Jewish families dip their bread in salt on the Sabbath, a quiet remembrance of those ancient sacrifices. The Bible is filled with references to salt. One of the most striking appears in the Old Testament, when Lot's wife is turned into a pillar of salt, a warning frozen in mineral form. Writer Sally Tisdale once described salt as both free as water when dissolved and unchanging as stone when dry, a perfect metaphor for its spiritual symbolism. Covenants in both the Old and New Testaments were often sealed with salt, representing eternal commitment. From this tradition emerged the deeper meaning behind words like salvation. In Christianity, salt became a powerful spiritual image. Jesus famously called his followers the salt of the earth, suggesting moral preservation in a decaying world. Salt also found its place in ritual practice. For centuries, the Catholic Church used salt in purification ceremonies. Until the reforms of Vatican II, a small taste of salt was placed on a baby's lips during baptism, symbolizing wisdom and protection from corruption. Art preserved salt's symbolism as well. In Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper, Judas has just knocked over a bowl of salt. In European tradition, spilling salt became an omen of betrayal and bad luck. To counter this, people began throwing a pinch of salt over their left shoulder, a custom meant to blind any lurking evil spirits. In Buddhism, salt is believed to repel negative forces. After a funeral, it is customary to throw salt before entering one's home, cleansing oneself of spirits that may have followed from the world of the dead. In Japan's Shinto tradition, salt is a tool of purification. Before a sumo match, an event deeply rooted in Shinto ritual, wrestlers scatter salt across the ring to cleanse the space and drive away malevolent spirits. Among indigenous cultures of the Americas, salt was equally sacred. In the American Southwest, the Pueblo peoples worshipped the deity known as the Salt Mother. Some tribes restricted who was allowed to consume salt at all. In Hopi legend, the warrior twins punished humanity by hiding salt far from civilization, forcing people to earn it through courage and hardship. Even in modern times, salt retained its spiritual gravity. When the Dalai Lama died in 1933, he was buried seated upright in a bed of salt, a final act of ritual preservation and reverence. In India, gifting salt is still considered a powerful symbol of good fortune. It also echoes one of the most important moments in modern history, Mahatma Gandhi's Salt March, when he walked to the sea to defy British salt taxes and reclaim dignity for India's poorest citizens. Across faiths and cultures, salt was never ordinary. It purified spaces, it sealed promises, it protected the living and honored the dead. Salt didn't just season belief, it made the sacred tangible. Salt and power, the economic history of salt. For most of human history, salt was not just food, it was power. Portable, essential, and universally needed, salt became one of the earliest foundations of global economies. Historian R. Bloch once suggested that civilization itself may have begun at the edges of deserts, where natural salt deposits surfaced from the earth. These locations weren't just convenient, they were strategic. Bloch even proposed that the first war in human history may have been fought near the ancient city of Es-Salt, along the Jordan River, over access to salt supplies. By 2200 BCE, salt was already a source of government revenue. In China, Emperor Xiaoyu introduced one of the earliest known taxes in history, a tax on salt. The logic was simple: everyone needed it, so everyone would pay. Salt also became money. Marco Polo recorded that in Tibet, small cakes of salt were stamped with the image of the Grand Khan and used as currency. Even today, among nomadic groups in Ethiopia's Danakil Plains, salt bars still function as a medium of exchange. In the ancient Mediterranean, salt shaped human value itself. Greek slave traders frequently bartered salt for enslaved people, giving rise to the phrase "not worth his salt." In Rome, legionnaires received part of their pay in salt rations known as salarium, the root of the modern word salary. To be paid in salt was to be valued. Across the Sahara Desert, salt was worth its weight in gold. In 12th century Timbuktu, a center of learning and trade, merchants valued salt as highly as manuscripts and precious metals. Knowledge fed the mind, but salt sustained life. In medieval Europe, salt taxes became tools of empire. In 1259, Charles of Anjou imposed the gabelle, a tax on salt, to finance his conquest of Naples. Over time, the gabelle grew brutally unfair, burdening the poor while enriching the crown. Public anger over salt taxation became one of the sparks that ignited the French Revolution. Though revolutionaries abolished the tax after the fall of Louis XVI, it returned in the 19th century and wasn't fully repealed until 1946. Salt also built America. When the Erie Canal opened in 1825, linking the Great Lakes to the Atlantic, it earned the nickname "the ditch that salt built." Salt tax revenues paid for nearly half of its construction, transforming New York into an economic powerhouse. In Britain, heavy salt taxes supported the monarchy but fueled massive resistance. By 1785, an estimated 10,000 people per year were arrested for salt smuggling. The white crystal created a thriving black market and deep resentment. That resentment echoed across the world. In 1930, under British colonial rule, salt was heavily taxed in India. In response, Mahatma Gandhi led a 200-mile march to the Arabian Sea, where he made salt by hand, an illegal act that became one of the most powerful symbols of resistance in modern history. Salt had no army, no flag, no voice. Yet it funded empires, sparked revolutions, and decided who held power. Salt wasn't just traded, it ruled. Salt at war, when armies fought for a mineral. War pushes both human bodies and entire nations to their breaking point. And in those moments of extreme pressure, the true value of salt becomes painfully clear. Salt deficiency doesn't just weaken morale, it weakens flesh. Without it, wounds heal slowly. Infection spreads easily, resistance collapses. During Napoleon's disastrous retreat from Moscow in 1812, thousands of French soldiers didn't die only from cold or hunger. Many perished because their bodies could no longer heal. Lacking adequate salt, even minor wounds turned deadly. Disease spread faster, strength faded. Salt, so ordinary in peace, became a matter of survival. Across the Atlantic, salt once again became a military target. During the American Civil War, the Union understood something crucial. To defeat an army, you don't just attack its soldiers, you attack its supplies. Salt works in Virginia and Louisiana were among the earliest strategic targets. In 1864, Union forces fought a brutal 36-hour battle to seize Saltville, Virginia, home to one of the Confederacy's most vital salt production centers. The reason was simple: without salt, the Southern war effort would collapse. Salt was needed for far more than food. The Confederacy relied on it to preserve meat, tan leather, and dye cloth for uniforms. It kept soldiers fed, clothed, and equipped. The shortage became so severe that Confederate President Jefferson Davis made an extraordinary offer. Any man willing to operate coastal salt kettles would be exempt from military service. That's how valuable salt had become. Not rifles, not cannons, salt. Throughout history, battles have been fought over land, gold, and ideology. But again and again, wars were decided by something far more basic. An army can march without glory, it can fight without victory, but it cannot survive without salt. In war, salt is not seasoning, it is strategy. Salt in history, a mineral that shaped civilization. Since its discovery thousands of years ago, salt has played a decisive role in human history. Its influence reaches far beyond cooking and food preservation, extending deeply into social life, economics, religion, mythology, and culture. For much of human history, salt was not simply a seasoning, it was a necessity, a symbol, and a source of power. Because salt was both valuable and scarce in many regions, it became a highly prized trade commodity. Entire commercial networks known as salt routes emerged, allowing merchants to transport salt across vast distances to regions where it could not be naturally produced. Archaeological evidence suggests that salt trading existed even in prehistoric societies. Among the ancient civilizations, the Phoenicians were pioneers in salt extraction and trade, mastering maritime routes and commercial exchange. However, it was the Romans who fully transformed salt into a global economic force. Through large-scale production, systematic processing, and a sophisticated trade network, Rome integrated salt into the economic foundation of its empire. Salt production and distribution reshaped geography itself. New cities were founded, and major roads were built to support the salt trade. One enduring example is Salzburg, whose name literally means salt city. Another is Italy's Via Salaria, or Salt Road, constructed specifically to transport salt from coastal saltworks to inland settlements. For centuries, governments recognized salt's importance and imposed taxes on it. In many countries, salt taxes remained in place well into the modern era. In Italy, for example, salt was subject to state monopolies until 1975. The government controlled production, importation, and pricing, with taxes accounting for nearly 70% of the retail price. Reduced prices were offered for agricultural and industrial use, while production remained tax-free in regions such as Sicily, Sardinia, and the enclaves of Livigno and Campione d'Italia. Beyond economics, salt occupied a powerful symbolic role in ancient belief systems. Many early civilizations developed myths, religious practices, and magical rituals centered on salt. Among the ancient Hebrews, salt symbolized community and shared joy. Eating salt together represented unity, peace, and brotherhood. Salt appears frequently in both the Old and New Testaments, where it represents wisdom, purity, permanence, and the covenant between God and humanity. In the Roman world, newborn babies were rubbed with salt on the 8th day after birth to protect them from evil spirits. In the Gospels, Jesus urges his followers to be the salt of the earth, calling them to preserve moral integrity and resist spiritual corruption. Salt also played a central role in ritual sacrifice. The ancient Greeks, Hebrews, and Romans used salt in offerings to the gods. Roman Vestal virgins prepared sacrificial grain by moistening it with brine. If salt accidentally fell from the sacrificial victim, It was interpreted as a sign of misfortune, a belief that echoes into modern superstition. This symbolism famously appears in Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper, where Judas is identified by an overturned salt cellar in front of him, foreshadowing betrayal and bad luck. Even today, salt remains embedded in superstition and folklore. Many cultures believe it can ward off evil spirits when sprinkled on spilled oil, while accidentally dropping salt is thought to bring misfortune unless countered by throwing a pinch over one's shoulder. In parts of Europe, it was customary to throw salt into a coffin before burial. As a symbol of incorruptibility and immortality, salt was believed to protect the dead from evil. In ancient Scotland, salt was added to beer brewing not to fight witches as folklore suggested, but because it slowed excessive fermentation and prevented spoilage. In the end, the white crystalline substance we casually reach for today has shaped civilizations, economies, religions, and beliefs across millennia. Salt has always been essential to life, but rarely has its influence been so quietly profound. In the United States, salt has never been burdened by discriminatory taxation, and across North America it remains abundant, accessible, and inexpensive, one of the most fundamental necessities we rarely stop to appreciate.